What does Paul's conversion story in Acts chapter 9 teach us about the power and the dangers of our convictions? Welcome to Past the Pulpit, where we dive beyond the sermon to look at life, love, faith, and community. Each week we ask of the preaching text what hopes, challenges, and passions are at the heart of the sermon. Welcome to episode 11, Why? From our sermon series, Everyword. Hey everyone, how are we doing today?
Good.
Excellent.
All right, okay. Again, we begin another episode, and we're rolling today. Pastor Ben, Pastor Raywin, myself, Pastor Icky. It's a pleasure to be with you all, and I hope that you're joining us for this great convo in the book of Acts chapter 9. Mm-hmm. Ben, would you take us in?
Acts chapter 9, verses 1 to 9, and it says, I'm reading from the New Revised Standard Version. Meanwhile, Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues at Damascus, so that if he found any who belonged to the way, men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. Now, as he was going along and approaching Damascus, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? He asked, Who are you, Lord? The reply came, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But get up and enter the city, and you will be told what you are to do. The men who were traveling with him stood speechless as they heard the voice, but saw no one. Saul got up from the ground, and though his eyes were open, he could see nothing. So they led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus. For 3 days he was without sight, neither ate nor drank.
The Saul to Paul conversion story. I know that we've heard it many a times in sermons. What stood out to each of you in the reading of this text?
Well, I love Jesus' identification with his followers that are suffering. I love that he says, why are you persecuting me? And then, I am Jesus whom you are persecuting.
Ooh.
So I love that Jesus identifies himself with those who are suffering, and anything that happens to Jesus' followers is happening to him.
Is it fair for us to expand that a little bit and just say that Jesus identifies himself with the suffering?
Yeah, I believe that's true.
And I only say that because sometimes in our world we're hyper-Christian, right, about persecution. And sometimes we do it in our country, in our world, where we're not actually being persecuted, right? And people are like, us Christians here are being persecuted. You're like, you're not being persecuted. Mm-hmm. You drive nice cars and live in a nice home, and like your context might not necessarily be the same. But I do think there are Christians around the world who are being persecuted, as well as a lot of people around the world. I think Jesus really identifies with that, huh?
Yeah. You're right.
Yeah.
I'm always on the lookout for unnamed or side characters in the
Yeah.
story. So I think it's kind of funny.
That's so cool.
Could be a little book about all the side characters. The men who were traveling with him stood speechless because they heard the voice but saw no one. What happened to those two people? Or those few people? They must be believers somewhere. They're probably like, let's not go back to the synagogue. We heard that this voice from nowhere was talking.
Wow.
And I think it's interesting because I do think that there are people who, you know, we when you go to week of prayers or camp meetings or those big talks where people kind of share their conversion story,
Right.
they're not the only person in the story.
Yeah,
right.
That's true.
But they share it, and like they're obviously, we're going to speak about ourselves as the main character of our own life. But there are people who are affected by our interaction with God, or God's also interacting with other people as God interacts with us.
Yeah, I love that.
You know? And so I'm sure that they probably had some story where they went on and they might have been motivated to do some stuff for God too, maybe not, but God interacted with them as well. They heard the voice too.
That's right.
They heard the speaking. And for all of us who maybe sometimes feel like
the no-namers,
I'm not the main character. Like, hey, I was there when that thing happened to that person. Well, yeah, and that's valid too. They probably had a story.
I love that. I never even thought about that before.
Yeah.
The side characters. You know what's interesting for me is that Saul here is breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord. Mm-hmm. And then Saul has this conversion experience where Jesus is like, why are you persecuting me? And Saul's like, what do you mean? Like, this voice from heaven, right? Saul's thinking, I'm doing the work for you. I'm doing this for you. What do you mean? Like, I'm
Yeah.
persecuting you. And then there's this whole conversion story, but we never think about the people that were affected by Saul before he became Paul.
That's right.
What kind of pains and atrocities did some of the unnamed characters have to go
Yeah.
through in their lives?
And how hard would it be to then welcome him into the community?
Yes. Right.
That
Because
would be tough.
and I hear is like when he gets called, he's like, Lord, I don't know if that's what I want to do right now. Like,
Yeah.
you do, God, you know who Saul is. Like, I don't want to be the first person on his conversion experience, just in case this is not real, right?
Yeah.
So the conversion story here, how do we live that narrative out today? Like, what does it mean for us to live out this conversion narrative of Paul's?
Well, I think the first thing is that, it is in the Bible, and um, the things that are in the Bible are standout moments. And so we shouldn't necessarily expect our moment to be as dramatic. I
Yeah.
think that's that growing up, I felt like, oh, I didn't have a conversion story or conversion experience because I didn't have a light from heaven voice fall off your horse kind of moment, right? And people do. There are people who have those kind of moments for sure. But I think that the quiet conversions and the slow and the not flashing light from heaven ones are valid and important part of the story as well. And so just remember that there are different ways that God gets our attention.
Yeah. I can't help but wonder, for each one of us, those who are listening, myself, all the three of us here, if God was to ask us, why are you persecuting me? Who would be the people that God is talking about in our lives?
Right.
You know, who are the people that, because of our actions, maybe that are experiencing pain or grief or loss or being
Wow.
neglected, or feeling lesser?
Right.
Who are the people that, when God says, why are you persecuting me, that that exist or embody God, yet we have neglected? That they embody the Holy Spirit, but we have neglected.
Yeah, and maybe sometimes we judge people because of our own conversion story. How come you don't have a conversion story like mine? Or vice versa. How come I don't have a conversion story like yours? And we feel a little bit like, am I not good enough? Or, did the transformation really happen in our lives? I was just thinking about that when you were saying that, Ray. But it only becomes problematic when those who are, it's not a post-conversion, but who are in the place where they believe they are convicted of doing the right thing for God.
Yeah.
And in that state, they are harming others' lives around us.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They're persecuting, they're just, and they're not, in their mind, they think they are honoring God. This is what's so glaring about this text for me.
Right. And I think that's what I'm struck by what Ben said in the question, who might I be persecuting in my zeal for God? Might I be creating suffering for someone else? Yeah. And might Jesus say to me, no, hey, that's me. That's and right. You're hurting me.
And that can go for those. I think it's easy also, maybe in a drive where we have more language to defend oppression. We have more language to defend people who we believe are on a different side of the spectrum as us. There could be also, if you feel like you're liberal, persecution of people who are conservative.
Yeah.
Right? Vice versa. And so in our zeal of maybe now being like empowered to stand up for what is right, is there people that we could be persecuting as well? Right? Because that's what's available to all. So whoever is feeling pain, right, that's we could be persecuting God.
So
Yeah.
we see that in Paul's conversion story. We see Saul who's just feels like, he's doing the right thing. He's convicted of this, and so he's got to do this, but in so doing he takes lives and he harms people. Then we see that the transition of the new churches, the early churches, and their desire for the Gentiles to be a part of this, but they need them to be circumcised. And we see a different kind of judgmental persecution there of sorts, right? Not the same level, but we see it happening around us. And I just think to myself, how do we operate so that our convictions don't persecute and harm others? Where do
That's
we
good.
operate from? What is the Christian value that each of us should be holding on to tightly, convicted by that really brings life?
I think it's good for us to at least pause and ask those questions when our words or our actions are causing others to be hurt. We should at least pause. And there's a difference between hurt and harmed. Sometimes, like, again, the parenting thing,
Yeah.
I might have to make decisions for my kids' benefit that might hurt them, but not harm them.
Right.
Right. So it doesn't mean that if anyone is feeling hurt, we're doing the wrong thing. But I think if
Right.
someone is feeling hurt, that should be a red flag for us to stop
Yeah.
and reevaluate. What am I doing? Is this the right thing?
Do our convictions need to actually create conflict?
Mm-hmm.
Like, does that have to happen? And I don't know. I think that the narrative is too common for us to feel like, well, if people don't get it or they're uncomfortable, that's what's supposed to happen.
Mm.
Right? Like, that's a common narrative in Christian spaces. That, like,
Yeah.
that's the Holy Spirit convicting somebody when someone feels bad or hurt
Right.
about it. Like, that's normal. And I don't know.
No, you're just being a punk.
I think it's okay to take the ownership that, like, we're just trying to drive this train right for a bit, like, And I just don't know if harm needs to be part of it.
I don't think so. I don't think harm for
Not
sure.
harm. No.
Yeah, I
No.
agree.
But hurt, I think, is. Hurt, I believe, is a part of living out. For me, the value would be love. Right? It would be love. And and the power of love is the action of justice. So when I'm caring for you and you're underprivileged or you're marginalized, my words may hurt some people because of the way that they treat you, but my words would but I'm not trying to harm those people, right? Like, so
That's true.
it's interesting that way. It's interesting that way.
I backtrack a little bit on what I said, because I said earlier, for those who might be in different spectrum as us,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and if they're feeling bad, or if they're feeling hurt, maybe I should say there's a difference between persecuting people and hurting people.
Right.
Maybe.
Right.
And
There
I
is.
think
Parents,
if you're-
parents, we hurt our kids all the time, but we hurt because they want to eat the gum,
Yeah.
because they want to stay up past their bedtime, and out of love, we have to be like, no, you have to go to bed, and that hurts them, right? Because it's not meeting their desire, their want.
Yeah.
But it is helping them because it's making them better people.
Yeah.
So in the interest of helping people become better, more loving, more good, sometimes the things that we say or we're convicted by will hurt, but it won't harm.
Yeah.
Right.
I do think there's a difference. I forgot. I don't know who to credit or which book.
You can
but
credit me.
I do remember reading about the difference between hurt and harm. And I think that is significant because we will feel hurt by each other too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ben
But-
hurts my feelings all the time. Talks about my fashion. It's okay, but he's trying to make me better. That's what I tell myself.
It looks good today. Thank you very much.
Thank the Lord. Thank the Lord.
And sometimes we all need forgiveness, right? Sometimes we
Yes.
will actually harm each other or harm others. And then we have to have that humility to stop and say, okay, what am I doing? This is harmful. That's the difference between, I think, doing something out of love, out of conviction, that you really are following Jesus in something and it hurts someone, but it needs to happen, versus I think following Jesus in that way should not harm others.
Yeah.
Like there's a difference there.
Absolutely. Tomorrow we may learn something different. And so our actions today should be caring towards people so that if what we learn tomorrow is different from what we know today, we can still have relational connections with each of these human beings. Our desire to love and be good should be at the center of all we do as Christians. I can't say it enough. This is all I ever preach about. We should just prioritize being loving human beings. God figures everything else out. God's got it all figured out. God's doing God's thing. Our job is to come along and love people and allow God to express that love through our actions, through our lives, through our words.
Yeah. And, one thing I didn't mention earlier that stood out to me in this text, I love that the followers of Jesus are called followers of the way. So today we say Christians, but it's not as descriptive, I think, of this description of being a follower of the way.
Right.
It implies acting in the way of Jesus, right? And that does bring conflict, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Because Jesus' love was outside their boxes and boundaries. And so I don't think we should go looking for conflict or persecution or being in people's faces at all, but be prepared that as we follow after Jesus, there's a cross involved, right?
Yes.
There's giving up. We talked about that a few times ago. So there is conflict that comes because of the power of love.
Yeah.
100% agreed. We know that this lifestyle, this way of living, the way, will bring conflict, and we have decidedly moved forward in our conviction to follow Jesus anyways. Yeah. It is the picking up of our cross. It is the facing of persecution and conflict and being through it all, I choose to love as Christ loves. That's right.
Yeah.
But Paul is on the road to Damascus. What an interesting little irony. I don't know if it's an irony, but he's on his way to Damascus, and he gets to convict the people of the way. And on his way, he realizes he's on the way for something different as well.
Yeah.
Like there's some transformation happening in his life.
Yeah.
What hopes does that bring us for the church?
Jesus is Lord.
Hey.
And Jesus has it covered. Jesus can turn people around in their tracks, even people that we might feel hopeless about.
Oh, that's good.
There's really no one that's outside of being turned around by Jesus. If God can turn Saul around, really against people, murdering people because of his religious convictions, and God has hope for everyone, and we shouldn't give up hope on people.
I think something as I'm listening and I'm reflecting on this story, because I'm like, yeah, Jesus has the power to turn me around when my convictions lead to pain and harm, persecution of others.
Yeah.
And also, I think there's a reality that there are people who are on the hunting path that might not ever get turned around. And that is not an affirmation of them doing the right thing.
Yeah,
Right.
That's right. God is not turning every person around. I was looking in Acts 9, and I think this fits with that. What God says to Ananias when he doesn't want to go. He said, I've heard about this man, right? How evil he is. And then the Lord says to him, go. For he is an instrument whom I have chosen to bring my name before Gentiles and kings and before the people of Israel. I myself will show him how much he must suffer for the sake of my name. And then it says, so Ananias went. I love that, because the two things that God tells Ananias, he says, I'm going to do something with this guy.
Yeah.
He's going to be part of my mission. I turned him around for a purpose. I have something greater for him to do. He's going to be part of my team. And guess what? He's not off the hook.
Yeah,
he is going to suffer. The suffering that he caused others, he's going to feel that pain.
Yeah.
And then Ananias says, okay, God, I just wonder if the Lord is like appealing a little bit to his sense of righteous indignation, because he says, hey, he's going to suffer too. And maybe part of that suffering is acknowledging, I mean, he's persecuted, but the pain of recognizing the persecution that he's caused and the harm that he's caused. I wonder if there are moments where he meets family members of people that have died. I wonder what that is like for him.
Yeah. And seeing as how Paul's heart had been for the church and the work that he had done all over, from Corinth to Ephesus to Galatia, you know that his heart was there, and you know that he ran into people, most likely, who had been part of the persecution or part of family members, part of the persecution. So what an incredible story about conversion and conviction and confession and calling, because Jesus kind of does all of that here. And I think it should be the prayer of our church that we're constantly before God, allowing God to convict us and to call us to be the most radically loving, caring, and beautiful part of his church, of God's church. What you think?
Yeah.
Okay, let's close out. And if you'd like to hear the sermon on this, you can jump over to the Last Year University Church YouTube page and check it out. It should be up there by now. But this is our workings towards what it might look like the day of when it comes onto the pulpit. Ben, you want to tell us what your thoughts on this, and then Raywin, and then I'll close out today.
Yeah. You're not out of reach of Jesus. You're out of God's reach. We might be doing things that cause harm to people. We might become in a position of being the oppressor, the aggressor, and yet Jesus is still calling.
Good.
I'm brought back to the very first thing I noticed in this passage, which is that if you're suffering, Jesus identifies himself with you.
And be careful of our convictions. They as strongly as we feel about them, we can be convicted of things that may or may not be of God, and not know it. So if you have to operate from operate from the value of love, which sometimes will hurt others but will never harm them. For the good of God and the good of humanity, we can all operate from the value of love. Blessings to all of you. We'll catch you the next episode, and if you want, check out the ones we had before this one. Be well.
Be well.